Okay, this is SPAD 320, Facilities Management, and today we're going to talk about venue financing, and this is part one of this topic. When a facility is going to be built, one of the things that needs to be considered is facility use. What are both the long-term and the short-term plans for this facility? One of the things that we want to try to do is try to expand the life of the facility as much as we can. And so you can look at the idea that this facility might be state-of-the-art for the first 5-10 years, or at least for the first 10 years, be functional, have no problems. But what does it look like 12-15 years down the road? What are the long-term uses that this facility might have? What are the possibilities for renovation and expansion, knowing that in that later period, as you get farther into the life of the facility, you might want to add on seats or change some things. These two pictures are from the University of Louisville football stadium, and as you can see, they were able to take their existing facility and build on and add on seats. The last question that you want to think about is, if you are replacing a facility, what's going to happen to the old one? Is it going to be used for something else? Is it going to be demolished? The committee that's working on this, or the group that is working on this new facility, is likely also going to have to at least make recommendations or considerations for the old facility. One of the first steps is going to be the site determination and purchase. Maybe purchasing one large tract of land depending on where your facility is looking to be built, or it may be separate pieces. Now, some of the problems that you run into is that if it's purchased in separate pieces, once that first purchase is done, or the first purchase that somebody knows who it is or what organization or why they're buying that property, then the surrounding properties, the price is likely to be increased. If they know that someone wants that really bad, then obviously as soon as they find out who it is that's buying it, they're going to increase the price. There are some organizations who will hire third-party organizations to purchase these for them, so that some entity who is selling the property can't figure out who it is who's buying. One of the other possibilities is to have what we call options to purchase. And an options to purchase is when, if there are several tracts of land surrounding where you want to buy or where you want to build, and you need those surrounding pieces, you might negotiate an option to purchase, that you will pay an agreed upon amount and it will be purchased by a certain time if the other pieces can be sold also and you can get those. If not, there's usually a clause put in there that will allow the option simply to die. It just goes away if people cannot get the rest of the folks to sell that they want to sell. One of the situations that comes up is the idea of eminent domain. And eminent domain is in the Constitution. It's in the Fifth Amendment, and it allows a government to force citizens to sell. Now, again, that they are selling, they're not just taking it, they're paying for it, and they're supposed to pay fair market price. Now, some of the problems that have come up are that municipalities will work on behalf of someone else and say that they are going to take the land over and then it will be given to a third party. And there was an uproar with that, and there was a legal case, and the landowners lost that case. They were saying, the city said that the tax money that was generated from that building that was going to be put in, or that project that was going to be put in, would generate tax dollars. Therefore, they had the right to force the landowners to sell, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision 5-4. So that's proposed. That's posed some problems, and various municipalities have proposed situations of being stricter. And one of the places where that happened was in Texas, because there was the possibility of the Cowboys using eminent domain to have land for their facility. Now, when they passed that law, though, in the Dallas suburbs, I believe it's in Arlington, they grandfathered in the Dallas Cowboys so that they did not have to comply with that new stricter rule. So let's talk about the bidding process. This is essentially the alphabet soup of venue building. The first thing that you might hear is called a RFQ, which is a request for qualifications. So this will be sent out to many organizations and many different types of organizations. It may go to architects, construction companies, um, plumbing companies, whatever it is. I mean, hopefully you're able to work with a construction company that may have architects on staff or contractors on staff that they work with frequently, but that's not always the case. So even when starting, or even if that is the case, when starting, you might send this out to several different folks, and you're asking questions such as, give me examples of facilities you've built similar to this. For example, if you're building a sports facility, you want somebody probably who's built a sports facility. They understand sight lines, they understand storage, they understand the flow. It might be somebody who is a great architect and a great designer, but if they haven't done sports, you could run into some problems. So you're asking for their qualifications. You're asking for examples of facilities they've built. Can you talk to other folks who have worked with them? So again, what are their qualifications? The second is an RFP, or a request for proposal. This is asking them to come up with a plan. What do they envision that they would do? A lot of times, probably pretty often, this is going to include some type of preliminary number of what they think it might cost for building. Doesn't necessarily always include that, but when you get into the terms of proposal, that's usually what's coming up. And then a request for bid, that definitely is going to include the numbers. So they're saying this is the facility that we think we can build, and this is how much we think it's going to cost. So a lot of times there are subtle nuances between these, and people might use the acronyms synonymously, and there might be pieces and parts that are the same in each, and a few pieces that are different. But these are the general acronyms that you will often hear when you're talking about building a venue. Selection of a venue. Okay, one of the things to consider is the total cost. Most organizations are going to already have that operating budget in place for that facility, so they know what it's going to take to have that open, have the doors open, and have it functioning on a daily basis, weekly basis, annual basis. Some of the things, though, that they also need to take into consideration when it's opening, besides the total cost of building, what are the total costs if someone who's in the a building that has to be torn down or next to it is displaced? What are the costs for any types of things that the builder is not supplying, but maybe is going out to a different bid for a different company? There are all kinds of different things that need to take into consideration when looking at the cost, not just what is in the bid that the builder is presenting. The payment dates need to be stated clearly within the contract. When is it that the builder is going to be paid, and in what form? Are there going to be inspections that are related to that? What are the inspection dates? They may not enjoy or want to have people walking around their facility, but if that's in the contract, you need to determine what the dates are, by whom, in what manner they will be done, how long they may take, what is it that they're looking for. Obviously, you also want to have that final inspection. You don't ever want to remit that final payment and turn that payment over to them without having that final inspection. Along with the total costs in the selection process, you want to look at a company that is financially stable. You want to make sure that they're not just low bidding this project because they're close to shutting their doors, and this one project might make them solvent, but then what if they have cost overruns? What's going to happen? So you want to make sure that the company you're dealing with, or companies you're dealing with, are financially solvent and have insurance in case of bankruptcy, so that if something does happen to them, what happens to you in the building of your facility. There are also considerations that you want to have in the contract. Let's take the example at Miller Park in Milwaukee, where a crane accident caused the death of an individual and caused delays in construction of that baseball park. What happens if there is some type of an accident or a tragedy or something that causes construction delays, especially if it's on the part of the builder? What is it that you're going to negotiate with them, and what are you going to put in the contract? Those are all things to think about when you're going through the selection process. Now let's talk about financing. And we're going to talk about this in more detail again in the next presentation for the next class. But obviously there's debt financing. So an organization can take out a loan. Obviously they're going to pay interest on that loan just as one would if you bought a house or a car or any other type of purchase through a loan. Then there are also bonds. Um, Bonds are going to be rated based on how likely it is to be repaid. Standard & Poor's and Moody's are two of a few organizations who will rate a bond based on a letter rating. Public institutions will use these quite often, and basically a bond is a promissory note that it can be issued by a variety of entities, but it's a promissory note saying that they will repay a certain amount with interest, and a stated interest over a set period of time. And if they are highly stable and they're rated high by Standard & Poor's or Moody's, then that interest rate is going to be much lower. And again, usually by municipalities and governments, but they can be issued by corporations and by various other entities also. One type of bond is a general obligation bond. And this has the full financial backing by the issuer. So anybody who buys this bond is guaranteed they're going to get the repayment regardless of the solvency of the project. So if somebody is trying to build a stadium, and even if that stadium winds up not being solvent and not making any money, the person who bought a general obligation bond that was used to finance that is going to get her money back. What will happen is it's usually through property taxes that a government is going to be able to reissue that payment for the bond if something were to happen. And because this is public funding and because there's a possibility that they could have to raise property taxes, people usually get a vote on whether or not to have them. So people in that municipality get to help decide. Revenue bonds, just one other thing with general obligation bonds, they tend to be rated higher, and therefore they have lower interest. And again, in addition to municipalities, universities can back these. So whereas a municipality might back it with property taxes if something were to happen, a university may back it with student fees. And so again, that just like a municipality member may get to vote on it, hopefully a student should get to vote, or a student organization should get to vote on whether or not those general obligation bonds are issued. For revenue bonds, the only financial support of the proposed project, if there's failure, it's too bad for the investors. Then so because of that, there's a higher risk, so it's usually rated lower, so it has a higher interest. So again, the only financial support is that proposed project. So if it's for a stadium and something happens and that stadium is not solvent, then that person is out her money. No matter what she invested, she's not getting that back, which is different than a general obligation bond. Okay, so anytime that an entity is going to deal with bonds or issuing bonds, obviously that's not something that an everyday person can do, even an everyday business person. They're going to hire legal and financial advisors for the company when issuing these types of bonds. It's not going to be something that is done cavalierly. That is this week's presentation, or this first presentation of the week. There will be another one to follow up. If there are questions, then we will address those questions in class.